When I lost this almost $80 million in 6 weeks, of course, this does get one's attention. When I changed how I viewed the world, it changed how people viewed me. We have the ability to change our brains. But there's a difference between what you think you want and what will truly make you whole. It truly was rags to riches. I had absolutely nothing. And here I was worth tens and tens of millions of dollars, private clubs and flying around private jets and having multiple homes and sports cars. Yet I was completely unhappy. And then when I lost everything, when you're in that mode, then anything is possible.
Hello and welcome back to Getting Open with me, Andrea Miller. This is a extra special show that is so near and dear to my heart, and I'll tell you why. This is the last interview that I conducted with one of my all-time favorite people. His name is James Doty. He was a famous neuroscientist and neurosurgeon from Stanford, the author, New York Times bestselling author of the beautiful book Into the Magic Shop, as well as this amazing book, Mind Magic. And Jim passed away July 17th, 2025, and has left such a huge hole in my heart and in the hearts of so many people. He and I were personal friends, and he was such an important teacher to me and to so many people. And so this last interview that I conducted with him is something I'm really grateful to share with you. I really do urge you to watch or listen to the end. It is so filled with unbelievable stories and takeaways and wisdom. And his nickname was Wooji. Oh, Wooji, that big heart of yours. I'm going to miss everything, but I think I'm going to miss your big heart the most. And honestly, the world lost a really, really special person, an amazing teacher, husband, father, friend, professor, surgeon, all those different roles that he played. And I'm glad to be able to bring this final interview that I conducted with him to you because there are so many actionable takeaways. I think you're going to love it. And with that, let's get into it. Welcome back to the Relationship Fitness Summit. My name is Andrea Miller, and I am hosting this amazing session with my guest and one of my favorite friends, Dr. James Doty. We'll be talking about compassion, kindness, open-heartedness, and how these are inextricably linked to successful manifestation, in our relationships and elsewhere in our lives. Quick reminder, pop over to the Relationship Fitness Facebook page because with this episode in particular, I know you all will want to share your favorite bits, ask each other questions, and just really take full advantage of this amazing guest that I have today. So let me introduce Dr. James R. Doty. He is a Stanford University neurosurgeon, neuroscientist, compassion researcher, entrepreneur, inventor, philanthropist, former chairman of the Dalai Lama Foundation, founder of Happy AI, an avatar companion for mental well-being. He is a manifestation master and a best-selling author of the beautiful book Into the Magic Shop, a neurosurgeon's quest to discover the mysteries of the brain and the secrets of the heart. He also released his second book recently called Mind Magic, little picture of it, the neuroscience of manifestation and how it changes everything. And you're wondering why I didn't show a picture of Into the Magic Shop. I gave my copy away recently because I just had to. And by the way, I have bought many copies of your beautiful books, Jim. So if those sales are going up on Amazon, I just want to say I'm pretty sure it's because I'm buying and recommending your book to everybody.
We have a whole section on Andrea Miller's purchase.
That's good. I just want you all to know that I'm doing my part. So I would love to start with a brief overview of your very compelling story, because for those of you who haven't read one or both of Jim's amazing books or are familiar with him, I want you to get a sense of his compelling story because it provides a invaluable context for the power and pitfalls of manifestation. So Jim, I'm going to take 2 minutes. It's hard to condense your amazing story to 2 minutes, but I'm going to give it a crack. And if I miss anything, I know you'll be hesitant to correct me. but I know you will.
You're very intimidating.
I know, I'm very intimidating. So Jim came from when you talk about a challenged background as a young person growing up, he experienced severe mental and physical abuse from his father. He grew up on public assistance. He had to look after his mother, who attempted suicide many times. The ACEs, the child adversity score, I think I'm getting it right, ACEs. Jim was basically off the charts on the kinds of experiences he had. His family got evicted. They were impoverished. He often went hungry. And so it was from this very, very, very challenging experience that as a 12-year-old, he happened to meet this wonderful woman named Ruth, who ended up, and this is some time ago, ended up teaching him the benefits and power of mindfulness, meditation, leading eventually into manifestation. What Jim did with that teaching from this wonderful woman named Ruth is absolutely incredible. So, I am not a paid spokesperson, but you got to read, especially Into the Magic Shop, to get that story in its fullness. But I want to emphasize how he came from this very, very challenging background and ended up getting into a top college, against all probabilities based on his own accounting, ended up getting into Tulane Medical School, where he didn't, as I recall, didn't have the grades, didn't even have all the credits. He had to make a powerful case for himself in front of a medical board that was going to deny him getting an interview. It was a sheer, conviction and will that they reluctantly agreed. And he went on to become a famous, incredibly successful neurosurgeon and neuroscientist, best-selling author, as you've heard. He made close to $100 million along the way. He had properties all over the world, some of the coolest European cars you can imagine, had seemingly everything: wealth, fortune, prestige. Again, coming from these really adverse background, having practiced mindfulness and meditation exercises, he had it all until everything came crashing down. And he realized that he had missed a really important part of the teaching that Ruth had underscored, that he had skipped. And I think that's hopefully a good time for you to chime in, Jim. If I missed anything, chime in. Oh, actually, I do want to add this. He ended up going bankrupt after making a ton of money. This was in the dot-com crash. And he nevertheless ended up finding out that he had $30-something million that he had pledged to a foundation or a charity. He found out the paperwork had never been signed. So that value, that money, cold hard cash, was actually his. And he decided, unlike the vast majority of us, to instead say, hey, I'll keep part of it, or I'll keep most of it, or I'll keep all of it. He said, no, I made that commitment. It's the right thing to do. So being bankrupt and actually having debt, he nevertheless maintained the pledge of $30-something million against all of these losses and all of this heartache. And it's just such an amazing story, because what he ended up doing with this loss is really the story of beautiful transformation. And it all comes back to open-heartedness, kindness, and compassion. Did I get that mostly right?
Mostly right.
Mostly right. Where anything you want to amend for the record?
Well, just a couple things which you didn't mention. So my father was an alcoholic and,
right.
Had a very difficult time maintaining a job. It wasn't so much physical violence. It was neglect and, anger issues, but not so much violence. And my mother had a stroke when I was a child and was partially paralyzed, had a seizure disorder, and as a result was chronically depressed. And this is why she often attempted suicide. The other aspect is that, and how I ended up in a magic shop, which may seem incongruent with our conversation, is that oftentimes when there would be challenging things at home, I used to get on my bicycle and drive as far and as fast away from my home as I could, because obviously I didn't want to be around that situation. And on one of those treks, I ended up at a strip mall, and I had some interest in magic. And so in the mall was a magic shop, and I walked into. And I think the key point is in regard to Ruth, it turned out that she was the only one there, and she was actually minding the shop of her son, who was a magician, and she was his mother, and she knew nothing about magic. But regardless, when I walked in, we made an instant connection. And the reason we made a connection was that she created what we now call a sense of psychological safety, in that she was non-judgmental. She had this ebullient smile that embraced you. She didn't look down on me. I didn't feel that she was judging me. She had a conversation with me where I felt we were equals, not looking down. And as a result, I felt very comfortable talking to her, unlike most situations with an adult. And as a result, after a conversation of 20 or so minutes, she said to me, "I really like you. And if you show up every day, uh, I think I can teach you something that could really help you." And as a result, I did show up every day. Now, it wasn't because I had any particular self awareness or insight. It was because, frankly, I had absolutely nothing else to do. She was nice, and she was giving me Chips Ahoy chocolate chip cookies. And those were the, the big motivator. So I did show up every day for 6 weeks. And during that time, she taught me what would now be described as a mindfulness practice, and followed by a visualization or a manifestation practice. So that's when everything changed for me, because fundamentally, with the insights and the knowledge she gave me, it gave me tools that allowed me to, if you will, realize my dreams, and also deal with my own sense of inadequacy or shame or insecurity. And so that's where it all started.
Well, thank you for rounding that out and for correcting the record with, getting those details right with your parents. I appreciate that. And as you and I have talked about, I mean, both having alcoholism in our family, it's a rough thing to grow up with. The thing I just want to add to when you talk about psychological safety, what the word that came to mind for me was trust. And and yes, you talk about Ruth's ebullient smile and warmth and so forth, but it strikes me for all of us to create that psychological safety for each other, because that atmosphere of trust that enables us to be more open-hearted. And you talk about in the book, you're like, "Oh, this is weird. Am I going to get kidnapped?" Like, what is even happening? Yeah, I like the Chips Ahoy, but she created, with that psychological safety, an area of trust that enabled you to open up to her. And I just emphasize that because when I think about our ability, each of us individually, to be mindful of how we can bring that to our relationships, it feels obvious. And yet at the same time, it feels like what's obvious is often missing. And we're all often waiting for the other person to go first. So I just wanted to underscore that point and try to bring it home as a practical matter for everybody. So most people want to manifest from the outside in. They want the fancy car. They want all the things you had. They want the fancy cars, a villa in Italy, $1 million, right? You talk a lot about when you were 12 and Ruth urged you to make your list. What are the 10 things you want most? And of course, we'll talk about how she also underscored that you had to make that list coming from your heart. And that was that's the cautionary tale now. So most people want to manifest from the outside in, right? They want all the trappings, the prestige, all these things, versus manifesting from the inside out. And that's exactly your downfall. And then when you figured out how to manifest from the inside in, not only have you become extremely wealthy, you have the fancy cars, you are friend and, if you will, advisor, maybe just in an esteemed relationship with some of the world's foremost spiritual gurus, from His Holiness the Dalai Lama to the Pope. Before Thich Nhat Hanh passed away, you all had a beautiful relationship, as I understand, and countless others, right? And so I emphasize that because I emphasize the crash and how you completely transformed your life. So not only did you have the success and trappings and so forth, you have been able to be instrumental at some of these highest, most important levels. And from what I can tell, it's because you went through your heart. And so will you just talk about that?
Well, sure. I like the analogy, excuse me, from the outside in to the inside out.
Mm-hmm.
And actually that very much is reality. What many people don't appreciate is that the manner in which Western society is now structured is actually not healthy for you. And the reason I say that is that the markers of success in Western capitalist society relate to power, position, and wealth. And people believe that if I just get this, my life is going to be perfect. Now, of course, we all know that that's not the case whatsoever. And in some ways, I make the analogy between fear and love. And what I mean by that is when you're trying to get external affirmation, uh, and you could use the term hedonic happiness, which is seeking pleasure, avoiding pain. And it relates to also this need for external affirmation so that you're told that you are okay, that this comes out of insecurity, shame oftentimes, and fear. And this activates your sympathetic nervous system. So this is the fear narrative. And what people try to do is by demonstrating to others that they're okay, and the okay meaning, see, I'm a success. I have a big house. I have a good job. I'm wealthy. This actually overall has a very negative effect because, as many have said, happiness does not come from outside affirmation. It comes from a deep sense of self acceptance and realizing that you are, in fact, okay. And in Epictetus, who was a philosopher and a slave, his motto was, I cannot change my external circumstances, but I can change how I react to them. But what people try to do is to hold these accomplishments up and say, I'm okay, in the hopes that this external affirmation will make them feel better. And it doesn't. Versus, as you were mentioning, this from the inside out is where you recognize that our species was actually designed to care for the other. And I mention that because if you look at our evolution as a species, our species has a very small litter, 1 to 2. Though that litter must be cared for well over a decade, and it requires a lot of resources. Well, why would you do that? Unlike other species that are born and run off into the jungle or the forest, ours have to be cared for. One of the reasons you do it is because, from an evolutionary perspective, when we care, which shifts us into engagement of our parasympathetic nervous system or our rest and digest system, all of our physiology actually works at its best, not only the brain, but your peripheral physiology. And it's associated with actually an increase in your longevity.
Mm-hmm. And that's when we're calm. I mean, essentially, when you say rest and digest, it's when we're calm, more likely to experience feelings of peace and joy and happiness, versus sympathetic nervous system, the proverbial fight or flight, our heart rate's up. It's hard to concentrate, right? So just to make sure everybody understands.
Yeah, and our cognitive brain networks don't work as well. Our physiology does not work as well. And so when you have engaged in this parasympathetic nervous system, you're open, you're thoughtful, you're caring, you're kind. And again, that's because when you're in that mode, when you do these acts of kindness or compassion, this results in the release of neurotransmitters such as oxytocin, which I think most people know, which is the love hormone or caring or affiliation hormone. And it stimulates your reward and pleasure centers. So, this is one of the reasons why we care. In ancient times, engagement of our sympathetic nervous system was not that common in the sense it wasn't constant and chronic. And as a result, you would respond to a threat and either you survived or didn't. And you went right back immediately into your baseline mode of engagement of your parasympathetic nervous system. The problem in modern times is that, unlike then, where we lived in small groups of people, small villages, you were born, you died there, you lived in intergenerational families, you had a community which supported you and knew everything about you, good and bad.
Mm-hmm. You had a
So,
sense of belonging, right? There was
exactly, you
you
were
were in
connected
a.
to everybody.
Mm-hmm,
People cared for you, and
mm-hmm,
so you didn't have this negative self-talk, always telling you that you're not good enough or you're an imposter. And the problem is in modern society, based on how our society is structured from a capitalistic point of view, you have to have a job. You don't know people because you're not living in the small community. Oftentimes, you don't know anybody. So you're at a new job. And of course, one of the things is this fear of being judged. And you don't have anyone to talk to. You don't have a relative, a close friend nearby. So the very nature of that creates this fear narrative, and people want to belong. So they think part of belonging is by this comparison to others, competing with others, and being able to sit there and say, see, I have this. So, unfortunately, this form of hedonic happiness is very shallow and very transitory. Unlike what you were talking about and with engagement of the parasympathetic nervous system, where you're open, you're generous, you're kind, you're thoughtful. And in some senses, this is a life of purpose and meaning. You recognize that others suffer. You intervene to help people, and not necessarily just with your own family, but with friends and those close to you, and hopefully within a wider community, because you benefit from that. But it's very hard in the modern world. But if you act from this engagement of your parasympathetic nervous system, you're much more joyful, you're much more happy, but it's hard to do in the modern world. And this is why we have an epidemic of stress, anxiety, depression, loneliness, and a sense of belonging because many people are terrified of being judged. And you look at a lot of people, such as influencers, and we all now know that they use filters, they use makeup, they use
yeah.
false backgrounds to give this impression they have a perfect
Mm-hmm.
life. And
Yeah.
first of all, no one has a perfect life. But
Well, it's highly curated. I mean, there's a funny picture of a guy in a sand pit, like in some dumpy place. And if you zoom in, he looks like he's on the beach. And then if you zoom out, he's literally in a construction zone sitting in a sand pit. And it's like, okay, right? I mean, it's just a ridiculous example of the fabrication that is so prevalent in social media. But let me ask you this: when it came to your personal experience, you talk about in the book how you were only 12 when Ruth admonished you and said, make sure when you're manifesting that list, make sure it comes from the heart. How did you end up remembering that? And when, you were sitting there in bankruptcy and even had substantial debt after you gave away the 30 something million, still had that debt. What was the aha and what did you do practically, right? Because you just described the importance of operating from the parasympathetic nervous system so that we're kind, we're compassionate, we're coming from an authentic place of joy and feeling enough. How did you go from that personal experience to, I mean, was it a few days? Did it take months? Did it take years to go, oh, okay, now I know really what I need to manifest, i.e. from the inside out?
well, you have to understand when I had this experience with Ruth, I was 12 years old and I was poor. And of course, this was before the concepts of mindfulness were known, or neuroplasticity. But so, from the perspective of a child without self awareness or insight who's poor, what is it that you want? It is basically what so many people think they want. And in some ways, this is the difference in terms of manifesting. You say what you think you want, but you don't understand what you really need because you have neither the experience or the self awareness to make those decisions. So the list I made, one was to be a doctor. Now, I cared about people, I wanted to help people, but the other aspect was I wanted to people look at me and go, he is a doctor. He's at the pinnacle of success.
He's
Yeah,
prestigious.
yeah,
Yes.
prestigious. And then, of course, I wanted to live in a mansion. Now, when I met Ruth, it was in the late 60s. And so I said, I want to be a millionaire. Well, having $1 million, it's not middle class, but it's certainly not like this massive wealth, but that's what I wished for. And it's funny because I remember walking home from school and I saw a fellow driving a silver Porsche Targa. I said, I want that. He's successful. And then I had a friend of mine was very wealthy, and I was at his house and his father was wearing a Rolex watch. And I said, I want a Rolex watch. Right? So all of these things were on this list. And based on what Ruth taught me, I very diligently chased after those, and in fact, achieved everything that was on my list. But again, I was doing it from the uh, fear mode and from insecurity. I wanted this external affirmation because I said, well, if people just see what I've accomplished, they'll know I'm okay. They'll say I'm great. And of course, as I said earlier, that positive feeling about yourself only comes from within when you accept yourself and recognize that regardless, you are okay, no matter what happens. But I was not at that point. So I did achieve all of these things. And here I am, very successful in a variety of domains. Yet, no matter how high the mountain, and having climbed it and standing on the mountain, no external affirmation made me feel okay. And I couldn't understand. Here, all my friends were telling me how great my life was,
Mm-hmm.
and I was not happy whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I lost this almost $80 million in 6 weeks, of course, this does get one's attention. Uh, but and it also required me to intersect with my banker, who had loaned me $15 million based on the price of my stock, which you could do at that time because it was publicly traded, and my attorneys, who had created all these charitable trust documents. Of course, they wanted to talk to me. And so I went through this deep period of reflection to understand, one, what had I really manifested? How did that happen? And what did I miss? So I actually went down to my home in Newport Beach, which actually was empty at the time, although it had some furniture in it, just to reflect on my situation because I'd also gone through a divorce. And I realized that all of my actions were not in service of others. They were in service of me, trying to fill that emptiness that I felt inside from my own background and my own shame that I continued to carry. And this was in the middle of this conversation with these attorneys because I was $3 million in the hole. I had to sell almost all of my assets to pay off that loan. And here I am trying to sit there and go, wow, what is my future going to be like? And you mentioned I went from rags to riches. And in the first situation, in fact, it truly was rags to riches. I had absolutely nothing. And here I was worth tens and tens of millions of dollars, and going to private clubs and flying around in private jets and having multiple homes and all these different sports cars, Ferraris, Porsches. Yet I was completely unhappy. And then when I lost everything and had to sell everything, I reflected on this. And in a different way, I went from rags to riches again. but this isn't more in the context of a spiritual journey, not a financial journey. And what I realized was that the purpose of all of us is to be of service, to care. That gives life meaning and purpose. That is udonic happiness, or excuse me, eudaimonic happiness. And in this case, when you care for others, when you're of service, when you look at it from the position of inward to outward, or from shifting from focus on I to us or we, then that changes everything. And so after this period of reflection, even though I was $3 million in the hole at the time and had to sell everything, I chose to go ahead when I had the option of holding onto this stock in this company that hadn't gone public, which I had committed to charity and I could have kept. I chose to go ahead and give it all away. What did that do? First of all, it changed my complete sense of my purpose. It made me understand that having things is not what makes you happy. And it made me, with great clarity, understand that the purpose of all of us is to care for others. When we do that, our physiology, both brain and peripheral physiology, function at its best. So, what I ended up doing was giving all of that money away, but it allowed me to do several things. One, it allowed me to develop health clinics around the world, blood banks. It allowed me to create programs for adolescents affected by AIDS, HIV. It allowed me to set up programs for the disabled. It allowed me to endow chairs at various universities and fund research. And it allowed me to create this center at Stanford that studies the neuroscience of compassion and altruism, which subsequently has become renowned throughout the world. But the interesting thing about it is that this actually allowed me to meet the Dalai Lama, who ended up being our founding benefactor and subsequently became a close friend of mine and resulted in me becoming the chairman of the Dalai Lama Foundation, which then allowed me to meet some of the most renowned spiritual and religious leaders in the world. And you mentioned some of them, the Pope, Thich Nhat Hanh, Amma, the Hugging Saint, Archbishop Tutu, Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, Sadhguru, Radhanath Swami, Eckhart Tolle, Byron Katie, the list goes on. And the interesting thing about it is, for me, is one, it really gave me insight and self-awareness. And it also made me understand why so many people want to get close to these types of individuals. Part of it is because, as an example, none of them asked me to become their follower. All of them live above their dogma. They can intuit who somebody is immediately. And I was not asking for anything. I did not seek anything. But what I did resonate with them was my now understanding of our purpose, which is understanding our interdependence, understanding our oneness or interconnectedness, and understanding that we are here for a life of meaning and purpose, which means we are here to connect with others. And those insights gave me this incredible gift. And in fact, that's the story of rags to riches, not from a financial perspective, but from the sense that I was impoverished in the context of how I had been seeing the world, to one of being overwhelmed with the riches and the wisdom and the knowledge that these individuals offered me. And as a result, it changed everything. And it's interesting because oftentimes when I have these discussions, somebody will sit there and say, well, I just want to try having everything. I want to have those.
Not unreasonable. Yeah, totally.
And I certainly appreciate that. And I'm not here to denigrate success from working hard.
Yeah.
But the difference is, for me, if I lose all of those things, and I drive a Porsche, I have a Mercedes, I live in a multi-million-dollar house. If I lose everything, my identity is not that. And I am perfectly fine, although was that my choice? Not ideally. but I would be perfectly fine not having those. That is not who I am. That is not what gives me a purpose and meaning. So I can let go of those things and focus on what's really important. And I think this is the challenge for some people because they're so wrapped up into their identity being things or demonstrating how important they are or how accomplished they are to get this external affirmation. But we all know that in no way is associated with happiness. And in fact, it's frequently associated with unhappiness.
Yeah, I mean, I want to thank you so much for that. I mean, such a beautiful, detailed explanation of your experience and how you turned it around. I mean, when I think about so many people coming from a place of lack and scarcity, so many people coming from various forms of addiction, whether it's, like us, parents, or, a parent was an abuser of drugs or alcohol or you name it. So many people will come from that place of lack, right? And it's just to your point, like this misguided notion of filling it up. But when you're an addict or a child of an addict, I would contend you can never fill it up, right? Because there's always somebody that's going to have more, right? So for me, the ninja move here is rather than, again, wonderful to live in a nice home and drive a nice car. I think I can say everybody would like those conveniences and so forth. But when I think about what really fills us up is in terms of feeling whole, like you say, feeling a sense of acceptance, feeling a sense of joy and peace, like it's completely internal, right? And that, so when I think about, again, your tale saying that's what you had to learn the hard way. And what I would love to do, since I think we only have about we have about 20 more minutes. Yay.
Right. Let's
Yeah.
get at it.
Yeah. Like I would love for you to walk me through an exercise or like what you do every day that really helps you stay grounded in the kindness, in the compassion, because again, from having read both of your beautiful books, it is a daily practice, right? I mean, it's a philosophy too, right? And I'm totally with you in terms of being in service to one another, the importance of caring and so forth. But to me, when I think about this being a practice that we give our bodies, just like eating healthy food, exercising, et cetera, it's a nice theory if we're not actually showing up and doing the work to calm our parasympathetic, or really stimulate, I should say, our parasympathetic nervous systems and calm the sympathetic nervous system. So just will you walk me through an exercise to
Well,
manifestation?
let me give you a very quick overview and then
Okay.
we'll head there. And the reason I say that, there's certain critical parts that, I talk about in the book, but the first thing people have to realize is we're all already manifesting, but oftentimes people don't appreciate the baggage they carry from childhood that affects every decision they make, whether it's their job, their interaction with others, their choosing of partners. And so until you can have some insight into that, you can't change because many people get into these negative patterns, often codependency, and they wonder why is that happening? So that's one aspect, and that may even require a therapist or some sort of journaling or self-reflection. The other side, as we talked about, or the other aspect which we talked about, is the difference between what you think you need or what you think you want versus what you need. Because again, the natural tendency is to look at society and go, wow, that guy's driving a Porsche. This person lives in a big house. That's what I want. You start chasing that blindly without understand that there's a difference between what you think you want and what will truly make you whole or what you truly need. So that's another aspect. And the other important point, which you mentioned, is we have the ability to change our brains. And it is not something that's not possible. It's not like we were born this way and we're stuck this way. And I think people, through their baggage they carry or past actions, oftentimes create a limited belief system of their own possibilities. And as you know, and I think Henry Ford had a great quote, if you believe you can't, you cannot. If you believe you can, you can.
Either way, you're right.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So you have to understand it is actually your brain and training your brain that makes everything possible. And that possibility can be both positive and negative. But when you're trained to do it correctly, it can be extraordinarily powerful if you learn how to embed your intentions into your subconscious and activate brain networks, which then turn that intention into reality. And the best way to do it is to be able to shift from the fear state to the love state. And the best way to do that is through a mindfulness or meditation practice, which oftentimes involves calmness and a breathing exercise, quietude, and self reflection. And some people, when you mention these terms, mindfulness or meditation, they get all anxious because they say, I can't sit still with my legs crossed and sitting in this position and my back straight. And unfortunately,
or I can't stop my thoughts.
exactly.
Right? I mean, I can't meditate. I've heard that a billion times.
Yes. And the reality is that, first of all, you have to get rid of that notion. Again, if you say you can't, you can't.
Yeah. If you can't meditate, then you can't meditate, right?
Right. Exactly. And so creating a space, it doesn't have to necessarily reflect an exact position. You don't have to be seated. There are many people I know who do walking meditation, and this is what Thich Nhat Hanh advocates. It's simply being in a space where you can sit with your thoughts, you're not distracted, there's a calmness around you, and you can just reflect. And through a breathing exercise, you can shift yourself into engaging your parasympathetic nervous system, which is when all your different cognitive brain networks function at their best. When you're in that mode, then anything is possible. And so I think that's an important lesson. And the other is to understand that.
Hey, I just want to interrupt there because I mean, I'm having an aha and I just want others to understand, like we're talking kind of, if you will, both physiologically, maybe electrochemically. I'm obviously not a doctor, but when I think about what you're describing, it is a necessary path to, to quite literally calm yourself. And it has, I mean, we could discuss or debate, what comes first, the kindness. Maybe we wouldn't, right? 'Cause I think you would probably say, well, you have to get into your parasympathetic nervous system, and then the kindness and the openness come in. But I really want to emphasize that as the, such an important precursor for successful manifestation, because I think it's easy for people to gloss over that. And the byproduct, not only is it going to help your, as you say, embedding your intentions into your neural networks more effectively, but it has this amazing byproduct of you show up differently. You're probably smiling more. You're calmer. You're nicer to be around. And guess what? The people at Starbucks are smiling back at you, right? I mean,
No, but that's exactly right. And you look at people, the energy they carry is just joy and happiness because, one, they're not afraid anymore. Two, they understand that they have enough oftentimes. This is the problem for many people. They look through the lens of scarcity. And sadly, many extraordinarily successful people cannot help but look through the world of scarcity, and they live in fear all the time.
Well, you've actually shared billionaires that that are so otherwise successful, but they are so deeply unhappy. I mean, you've shared some amazing stories where you're like, how can it be these people have endless resources and they still can't figure it out?
Yeah, no, and it's horribly sad. And I do, if you want to call it coaching, counseling, interacting with many of these individuals, and it's terribly sad. But the other thing that's really important, which you alluded to, is this doesn't just happen overnight. These are habits that you create, and it requires practice. It requires, if you want to say, intention. And it's not as if you wake up and go, well, I'm going to run a marathon today. You wake up and say, I want to get into shape so that I can run a marathon. And those are two different things. And what I mean by that is, in some ways, it's like our New Year's resolutions, right? We sit there and go, I'm going to lose 50 pounds. And then January 1st happens and you're suddenly snacking on junk food again.
Right.
Because you haven't created in the narrative of, today I'm going to cut down my calories by X, or I'm not going to drink sugar or sodas and things like that, right? And so you have to slowly build up to this so that your body and your mind gets attuned to these habit changes. And what they say is, I think it's what fires together, wires together. The way in which you lay down new neural pathways or strengthen neural pathways is through repetition. And this is what's really important. Things don't happen overnight. The other aspect is having too strong of an attachment to an outcome, such that if it doesn't work out the way you envision or in the time frame you envision, you become very self-critical. And the nature of manifestation, which involves actually many of the techniques that some are associated with the woo-woo science of meditation, is intention and repetition. And you list your goals and you use your sensory organs, all of them, or as many as you can, to actually strengthen these intentions. And that's by writing it down, using your hand physically, looking at it and reading it silently, reading it aloud, uh, and then visualizing it in your mind. Every time you do this, and even when I was quite young, I would literally spend hours doing this, just making this list over and over and seeing it in my mind. And the more you do it, the more it gets clearer, this vision. But these are habits you have to show up and do. It's not.
Well, and I should add that you talk about in the book when you were 12 and you didn't have a ton other things to do, granted, but that you had a very, very aggressive daily meditation, mindfulness, manifestation practice for more than 10 years, right? 12, 15 years. Right. And it kind of fell apart, and then you've had to bring it back up. But to your, I just really want to drive the point home that there can be, and you talk about in the book too, that there were I remember there was a story about rent, that there was a very improbable occurrence where your rent was due. You were worried about being evicted. And I think somebody that your dad had loaned money to showed up out of nowhere. And that was like, ooh, like, hey, that was like almost like instant manifestation. But I just, again, I appreciate your point that this is typically not an overnight thing. It really is a cultivation over time. And you can't be attached to the exact way or the exact timing for things to materialize, or again, back to your sympathetic nervous system getting acted, right? Because now you're back to in a fear mode and not trusting.
No, that's exactly right. And this is why when you cultivate this as a practice or a way of being, in many ways it becomes effortless. Every action you take is in the sense of, how can I be of service? What is it that I can do to help others? And this idea about acquiring things for the sake of acquiring things, what happens is actually oftentimes the things that you desire materially actually oftentimes will come to you if you're in that mindset all the time, where you're not craving, where you're not attached, where you're not striving, but you have a calmness about you. Because, as I tell people, when I changed how I viewed the world, it changed how people viewed me.
You showed up differently.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Okay.
Yes.
So, and I interrupted. So I think we got the points down that you were talking about. Embedding the intention into the neural networks, using a regular meditation and mindfulness practice, not being attached, intention and repetition, making sure you read, you write it down, you read it out loud, you read it to yourself, you visualize it and so forth. Anything else in that I missed? Because I feel like, I ended up interrupted you at one point. Did we get
I'm very hurt
points?
by that, and I was setting.
I know. I owe you.
Yeah, you do. Well, actually, in the book, as you know, there is a 6-step program that goes through every aspect of this process, because the goal here is, how can I maximize my ability to manifest my intention? So one is recognizing the baggage you carry from the past and dealing with that. Two is understanding what you really need, not what you think you want. The other is attachment to outcomes. Yeah. And so, and then, now I'm trying to remember my own damn book. But
this was a pop quiz that I didn't tell you about, to be fair.
yes. Well, it's funny.
On you.
I was on there was a podcast that's a university does, that's a science podcast. And many of the things I talk about in the book can get very technical, although hopefully I describe them in an easy to understand way. But it's not as if I have memorized every brain network or every aspect of what makes these different cognitive brain networks. And I'm on this podcast. The guy goes, now, could you tell me all the different parts of the brain that are associated with this cognitive brain network? I'm like, oh my God. But if you get the book, and now I'm not trying to sell you books, I would suggest get it from the library. It's free. But that being said, there are certain steps you go through that strengthen your ability to embed your intention through a process that is called value tagging, so that it gets into your subconscious and activates these different cognitive brain networks that increase the possibility of your manifestation occurring. And the other interesting aspect, and we talked about attachment, sometimes your subconscious knows better than you. What I mean by that is sometimes things don't manifest, or it's not possible. And it's not because, unlike oftentimes in the woo-woo nature of manifestation, that the universe didn't answer your request. At best, the universe is indifferent. It's that the process you used or the other aspects going on were not aligned to make it happen, and that's okay. One of the things I talk about is what is called dispositional optimism. And actually, there's some great stories about a Vietnam veteran who was in prison, and he had no ability, of course, to predict when the war would be over, when he would be released. But he had this deep sense that what he wished for, which in this case was to be released, would occur, but he did not attach a time frame to it. So it allowed him to be constantly optimistic about this possibility. And I think this type of dispositional optimism is really important.
Well, it kind of comes back to trust too, right? I mean, somewhere it reminds me of Viktor Frankl too, and his beautiful book, A Man's Search for Meaning, that in these extremely terrible circumstances, that there are some rare individuals that can define their own meaning and derive optimism from that, and something from deep within, a sense of trust seems to pervade.
Well, and there's evidence, a lot of evidence, that when you have this type of an attitude, and you're able to shift yourself into constantly being in this optimistic, positive mindset, and which is what this book in many ways is about, is changing your mindset, that this is associated with an increase in longevity and a decrease in conditions such as dementia or a lot of other conditions which shorten your life. And so human connection, understanding how important this is. If you look at the work of Dan Buettner, and who has written a great deal about the blue zones, which I alluded to about living in villages long ago, and places in the world where they still do that, or the work of Robert Waldinger, who took over the 85-year-old Harvard adult development study, for which there was a book, I think it was entitled Longevity and Happiness. Fundamentally, what makes a life worth meaning is to care for others and to have this dispositional optimism and this deep sense that everything's okay, you will be okay, and at the end of the day, your actions allow you to flourish and thrive as a human being, and it also allows others to flourish and thrive. And that is fundamentally our purpose. And this doesn't relate to religion. You could argue it relates to spirituality, if you will. But again, it's this deep sense of our interconnectedness, our interdependence, and a sense that we're here for the other.
Yeah, and that's such it's a beautiful segue into how we can manifest, this is a relationship fitness summit. So I appreciate that, bringing it full circle. I know, from my personal experience, it's like when I show up, caring, open-hearted, um, in a compassionate place, the experience is typically beautiful. And even if it's challenging, it's like I have much greater resources versus crabby, pessimistic, and so forth. Everybody's had that experience. And so I think going back to your principal point, which is it's like we're here to be in service to one another. And when we get that, and we're willing to do the practice and go within to calm our nervous systems, that how we show up does in fact enable us to foster those beautiful connections. And that, I often think of things as a vicious cycle or a virtuous cycle. And I feel like what you're describing is how we facilitate a virtuous cycle. So rather than saying, oh, that guy's just such a jerk, or, that person is just such a, coming from judgment and criticism, we're able to show up with greater compassion, patience, and gentleness. And that to me, I always say, it's like, as an individual, it's on me to go first. It's on me to show up in that way.
Well, and I think one other excellent point is to realize, though, that we have no ability to judge either what has happened or is going on in someone else's head. And oftentimes their interaction with us actually has no relationship to us. And it can relate to an argument they had with someone else or some other situation. And so this idea of gentleness and being patient and thoughtful can be very powerful. And again, we know that when you're kind and compassionate, on some level, it's contagious and it motivates those around you to be the same way. And unfortunately, conversely, it can be in the other direction as
Well,
well.
so yeah, I would really underscore that point. I mean, we've all been in different environments, different corporate cultures, and so forth. Some corporate cultures, it's very cutthroat. It's there's eye rolling, there's sarcasm. That's how everybody. That's the norm, and somehow that that becomes the norm, and that's how a lot of the people behave. And I feel like the opposite is true. I mean, especially I'm very fortunate and grateful to say at my company, YourTango, the sense of care and how we show up and treat each other, that's the norm that we've set. And so I think these, in fact, I mean, there's been a lot of data that shows people that tend to smoke, getting divorced, being overweight, even things like suicide and self-harm and so forth. There's like a social contagion, both to the positive and to the negative. And so, it's like, Terry Real will talk about how relationships are the biosphere we live in. So it's like, what am I doing in my biosphere? Am I bringing the compassion and joy, or am I bringing the toxicity?
Well, and the interesting thing is that all of this happens right here. There's no external thing that creates this. We are the one who creates it. And this is why, you can see people, and I'm sure you've seen people in challenging circumstances, but they have this joy and happiness about them. You're going, how could they possibly be that way with this or that? Yet they are. And that's because they've chosen to be that way. And as you pointed out, there are people who are extraordinarily successful who are absolutely miserable. And that's their choice. And so we can't forget that within our heads is the power to create a prison for yourself that's dark and scary and makes us feel inadequate, or our choice is to leave the prison and understand that we have endless possibilities to change ourselves, and I think change the world in a positive way.
Well, it's such a great note. Unfortunately, we have to end. But when you were describing your experience and having lost so much wealth and nevertheless still gave away these tens of millions of dollars, and as you kept saying, as you were reflecting on what happened, the word that came to mind for me was you were accountable. You recognized where you erred, and you took this huge leap into the unknown by giving away this vast fortune, leaving you with debt. And when I think about just having that trust in oneself, being accountable, like nobody can give that to you. You gave that to yourself. And, and as you said, I mean, all these really, really remarkable, extraordinary, even people that you've bonded with, it's like you show up differently based on making those choices. And that, to your point, totally different than coming from the victim and scarcity mentality that says, poor me, everything sucks. All those tapes that we've all played in our head, the DJ in our head, as you talked about with in Into the Magic Shop, that it ends up being a matter of personal choice. And like you say, we all have that opportunity. And that's why, coming full circle, when I think of your extraordinarily adverse circumstances and what you were able to do, both financially and eventually, to become the very best version of yourself, it's like, all right, that's the opportunity, the story of opportunity for everybody.
Well, and I don't want in any way to imply, though, that somehow I'm perfect, because I'm not. I still make mistakes. But we're all on a journey. We're all on a path. And if we can understand that with the right attitude and actually the support of others, do amazing things. And so the most important thing is to be kind to yourself, be gentle with yourself, and look through the lens of an open heart.
Yeah, I love that. And even I feel like if you were perfect, then there wouldn't be as a reason for as self-compassion. Right. So it's like, okay, Mother Nature has baked in, even with you, just a couple teeny tiny things that aren't quite perfect. All right. I've got
Yes,
one last.
Andrea, thanks for saying that. I
Just
appreciate
little teeny tiny microscopic things.
it. I'm
Next
going
time
to
I
have
see
to
you,
run. What do you want to say to me?
all right. If you were on the mountain and Moses handed you a tablet, it's the thing that is going to be cast in stone into perpetuity. What would it say?
Love.
Just love.
That's all we need. Like there was a song I heard about.
Cue the Beatles. You got it.
Exactly.
All right. Jim, you are the best. You're such a dear friend. You're an inspiration to me and to so many. Thank you so much for this session. And I look forward to seeing you in person very soon. All right. And this
Yes, my dear. Much love to you. Thank you for being you. And Elisa back there who's hiding. Thank you. And much love.
Yep. This is a wrap to the amazing episode of Relationship Fitness.